And here we go, lesson 2 of the Professional Diploma in Web Development. In our last session, we focused on Introduction to the Web. In today's lesson, lesson 2, we are going to be focusing on the introduction to HTML as a markup language for the web. Now, let's have a look at what this lesson entails for today. In today's session, the first thing we'll be doing is having a look at HTML, and we'll properly define HTML and unpack the language to kind of figure out why it is so important when it comes to web development and why it powers so much of the websites out there. Apart from this, we'll also be installing our IDE, known as our Integrated Develop Environment. And this is a software package or software tool that we use as developers to write our code in. Okay, and then lastly, we'll create our very first web page. It'll be very basic at first, but as we progress, things will become a little, if not a lot more complex. Now, before we unpack the content, just a little quick fun fact. And did you know that people start viewing your website from the top left corner? And I think this holds true for many of us. Now, we refer to this as the F pattern, and it essentially applies to virtually every single website out there, if not all websites, depending on how your content is set up. And it's just the way our brains have been trained when it comes to searching for information and looking at data and information on websites. So I thought I'd include this just as a technical fun fact moving forward. Great stuff. Now for our very first topic. So then, what exactly is HTML then? And that is something we're going to be unpacking in this very first topic. And essentially, HTML, also known as Hypertext Markup Language, is the standard markup language for the web, especially when we're designing web pages as well as web applications. Now, you might be asking yourself, what's the difference between a web page and a web application? In essence, for the most part, a web application tends to handle more data or tends to be more data intensive. Okay, and web browsers receive HTML documents from the web server, as we discussed in our very first lesson, or from local storage, and then renders these documents into multimedia pages using a client, for example. So then, what are some of the characteristics when it comes to HTML? Well, number one is that HTML is essentially the cornerstone technology used by most web developers or used by most websites. And this makes sense because there are other languages out there such as XML, but those languages are more for data intensive applications. So for the most part, most websites in the globe essentially use HTML as a language, especially because, again, it's a cornerstone technology of web applications or websites. Apart from this, it also allows you to embed media files such as music or MP3 files, audio files specifically, video files, as well as media files. And this includes things such as GIFs. Okay, and then also HTML follows this semantic design approach. So the code is sort of read from the top to the bottom of any HTML script. Everything gets generated from the top to the bottom. It's not as if your client is going to interpret the middle part of your code and then the top and just do a whole bunch of mixing. That is not the case when it comes to HTML. And we do a demo, I will show you exactly what we mean by semantic design. And then it also allows developers to embed JavaScript. And JavaScript is extremely powerful when you want to make dynamic changes on your website. A typical example here is maybe animating a button or providing a pop-up to the user so that they can actually do something, or just anything that you cannot do with HTML and CSS, you tend to be able to do with JavaScript. Now, the nice thing about JavaScript is that you can actually use JavaScript to build or compile your CSS as well as your HTML code. Okay, and then also elements use tags, or we tend to use this interchangeably where we say elements and tags are essentially the same thing, but they have attributes, and attributes are properties of an element that you can manipulate, such as the color, the width, the height, all of those kind of things. And again, all of this is going to make a lot more sense once we dive into an example. Now, HTML has been around for a while, believe it or not, and it was first invented by Tim Berners-Lee. And funny enough, the language or the platform itself was conceived in a European laboratory that focused specifically on particle physics. Just a quick interesting fact. So we have this new one called HTML5, which is the latest revision of HTML. Okay, and this is the very first point that we should take into consideration, because we've also had HTML4 prior to this, but the functionality wasn't always there as you compare to what we have today. Okay, so HTML5 also adds support for embedded multimedia content, relying less on JavaScript. Now, earlier we did say that JavaScript allows you to make your website more dynamic. The idea behind this particular technology, HTML5, is that you can actually do a lot of things that you would previously require JavaScript for. You can do it purely through using HTML as well as CSS, for example. Apart from this, it also introduces application programming interface, also known as APIs. And a typical example of an API would be something like dialing into Google's services, such as Firebase services, as well as the Google Maps services. An API allows you to extend the functionality of your software or your web platform without having to write the code from scratch, right? And then also it does enable cross-platform development or implementation. And this is quite important, especially when we consider low-power devices such as mobile devices, because most people use mobile devices to either browse the internet or do their day-to-day tasks over the internet, as opposed to using a laptop or computer. So the focus here really is all about mobility at the end of the day. And then it also enriches the semantic content of documents by introducing new page structures, if you will. And we'll have a look at this in a second. I'll show you a very, very basic architecture. And then lastly, it also accommodates the use of multiple and outdated browsers, which is quite important and quite powerful, I think, especially if you consider users that still prefer browsers such as Internet Explorer or sometimes Edge, for example. They are not as popular as Chrome and Firefox, which tend to be your leading internet browsers, but at least HTML5 accommodates these browsers, ensuring that your reach to your user base is much, much larger. We've been talking about HTML for a while now, so I think it's about time that we actually have a look at the code for defining and creating a very basic and simple HTML document. In our first line of code, what we have is this thing called doc type HTML, and this code essentially allows us to declare that this is an HTML document. So when it's passed through the browser or a client, the client treats it as such, as an HTML document, just like you would have an MP4 video or MP3 audio file. There is a specific format to that file, okay? And then what we have is an opening tag for our HTML content, and anything between our opening and closing tag, when it comes to our HTML tag specifically, this is where you would host your content. Moving on, we have the head tag, and the head tag is essentially data about data. That's kind of the best way to think about it, right? And we can use the head tag if we want to convey information to the user that's not directly visible inside of the website. Take a tab, for example, in Chrome. There would normally be the name of the website. This is why we would use the head tag. And inside the head tag, we would use this thing called title. And this would be the page title or the website title, just as per the example we made a couple of seconds ago. Okay. Again, I will have a proper example demonstrated to all of you, so you can actually have a look at how the head tag and the title tag works. Moving on, we have the body tag, and the body tag is where we essentially host all our main content. This includes things like paragraphs, images, videos. This makes up the bulk of any given website. And then we have our header 1 tag, which is quite common across multiple, if not all, websites. And the header tag essentially conveys information to the user that this is a core piece of information inside of the website. If you take a blog, for example, a blog could have a title, and that title would be bold and it would be really huge in terms of font size. It would really pop to draw the user's attention. After this, we have our paragraph tag, and our paragraph tag is where we tend to jot text-based information like the actual content of an article, for example, or a blog again. Wonderful stuff. Now, earlier we did briefly mention elements and tags and that they have attributes, but let's dive a little deeper to see what it's all about. So essentially, tags are the starting and ending parts of an HTML element, and here is a typical example of a paragraph tag. So what we have is the opening tag with the P, and we essentially use angular brackets to open up a tag. So open angular, the letter P, as well as closing angular. And then anything inside of this would be your content, right? Like a text or a sentence or whatever the case is. Then we have a closing tag just after that with another open angular bracket, a slash P, and a closing angular bracket. Right now, an element is slightly different, but essentially they are the same thing. We refer to them as the same thing when we talk pseudocode or when we talk web development languages. And essentially, elements enclose the content in between the tags. And an element is essentially a combination of the tag itself, the closing and opening tag, as well as the content that sits between those tags. And in this case, we have a sentence that says, "This is some text." Okay, now you might be asking yourself, do all elements or do all tags have closing and opening tags? No, that's not the case. Some elements actually only have opening tags. Now let's turn our attention to some common HTML tags that we will most likely be using quite often in the web development process. And here we have a table listed with several of those tags. First, we have the anchor tag, and this is essentially just an element with an href attribute. And an href attribute allows you to create a hyperlink out of a simple text, for example, that allows you to navigate to either a web page inside of your own website or a web page or website completely external from your own website. We also have the div tag, which is a dummy element, and this allows you to contain block level elements such as images and other media files. Then we have the h tag. Now the h tag is essentially a heading tag, and we have h1 up until h6. H1 being the highest level and sort of the boldest and biggest text that you can think of, and they are used quite often for the headings of an article, where we would use H2 or H3 tags for subheadings with inside our blog or our article. And then we have the image tag, which is quite popular and quite useful for embedding media into your website or web page. And when we use the image tag, we must always use the source attribute, which is notated as src. And the source attribute just sort of points to a certain image inside of your file path that you want to load into your website. We can also use the alt attribute in the event that the source image doesn't load. The alt attribute allows you to throw some text up like this image cannot be displayed, for example, just as a precaution. We also have the list item tag, and we would use this when we want to create ordered lists or unordered lists. And again, this is something I will be demonstrating to you. Lastly, we have the span tag, which is a dummy element which contains inline content and not block level elements. Wonderful stuff. Now let's have a look at some other tags that we could use to design the architecture of our website. Now, here are some additional common tags when it comes to HTML, as long with an architecture that we can kind of map it to as we progress and address each one on the list. And essentially, we first have the header tag, and the header tag specifies a header for the document or a section. Now, a header tag is, again, information that you can use to host things like H1 tags or H2 tags, or just overall or overarching headings for a particular website or a section. And then this brings us to our next one, the nav, which is extremely important and one we will definitely be covering when we decide to build a navigation bar. As essentially, a nav tag defines navigation links, and we tend to use this in conjunction with list items so that we can list several links within our website or inside of a web page. We also have the section tag, which defines a certain section in the document. So maybe you have a section that's focused on galleries or products or a quoting system. All of these kind of things sort of come to mind here. And then we also have the article tag, which is quite popular in blog post websites. And then moving on, we've got the aside tag, and the aside tag is essentially just that one element or the one portion of your website where you would want to assign additional information or content. And this could include things such as links. It could include things such as a API that externally links to Instagram or Facebook. Any information that's additional to your website but not necessarily core, for example. And then last, we have the footer. Now the footer is the very last part of a website, that bottom chunk where you often see things like about us and a whole bunch of links that wouldn't otherwise be in your navigation bar. Okay, now we also have the main and the figure tag. The main is essentially a combination of all of these tags put together. Your main tag is your overarching tag for every single tag. It houses all your tags, if you will. And the figure tag is essentially just used if you want to slot an image in somewhere inside of your website. Wonderful stuff. Now for an exciting part of this lesson, we will be installing our IDE. But before we do, I actually want to go through the list of popular IDEs that you can consider for web development. Keep in mind though, as we progress through this course, we will only be focusing on using one particular IDE. Now, like we mentioned before, an IDE is basically an integrated development environment, and this is the environment of the software that we use to script our code. So let's have a look at some of the popular ones out there and sort of factor out the ones we won't be using and the ones we will, or the one particular IDE that we'll be focusing on. And first, we have a very, very popular one known as Visual Studio Code, and this was developed by Microsoft. We also have Atom, which is my personal favorite and the one we will be using moving forward. Then we have Sublime Text, or Sublime Text 3 is the latest iteration of this IDE. And again, I will be perusing through each of them with you so that you can kind of get a feel for which one you might prefer, okay? But again, keep in mind, we'll be moving forward with Atom. We also have Brackets, and Brackets is pretty lightweight as well, very comparable to Atom in a sense. And then lastly, we have Node++, which has been around forever. So let's dive into each of these IDEs and delineate the different characteristics and the features that come with each one of these software packages. So firstly, we have Microsoft Visual Studio, and you can simplify the software by visiting visualstudio.microsoft.com. And Microsoft, the nice thing, one of the best features about Microsoft is that it's actually cross-platform compatible, which means you can use it on a Linux system, a Windows system, as well as on a Mac OS system. If you do want to download the software, just make sure that you are clicking on the download link for Visual Studio Code and not Visual Studio. Another great benefit of Visual Studio is that it allows you to actually install so many different packages or add-in packages and integrate packages to make your workflow a lot more seamless. And then there's also integration with things such as Azure. Now, next on the list, we have Atom, and Atom by far is my favorite IDE when it comes to web development, especially because it's a portable piece of software, it's extremely light, and it also shares the benefits of having a cross-platform capability system, much like we just discussed with Visual Studio Code. And this is what the user interface looks like. And another great feature about Atom is that you have access to GitHub, for example. So if you want to host your code, if you want to pull your code, you are able to do that. Visual Studio Code essentially has the exact same feature. And Atom also allows you to install additional plugins and packages. So the two are not very far off, although I will say that Visual Studio Code probably has way more features, but you won't be using all of them. And therefore, for myself, I just prefer Atom because of its lightweight capabilities and because of all the features you actually get with the software. Moving on, we also have Sublime Text, and as mentioned before, Sublime Text 3 is the current and the most recent stable build. Sublime Text is really awesome, and it supports a ton of languages, not just web development languages, which is also what makes it a favorite among developers. You also have Git access, and you can alter your UI and your theme that you're working in, and you can pretty much do this with almost any amazing IDE or any of the IDEs we actually just discussed as of recent. The one thing about Sublime, I will say, is that even though you can run it for free and you don't necessarily need to buy it, the issue is you always get this pop-up that tells you need to purchase Sublime. But in actual fact, you really don't. You just have to then just sort of click on the cancel prompt or the OK button in this prompt to just have that alert to go away. But again, it can be annoying, so it is something to consider. And again, Sublime is also lightweight, and if I'm not mistaken, they do also support packages in the long run. Wonderful. Now we also have Brackets, and Brackets used to be one of my favorite tools, especially because it's got this live feature that comes built in. So whenever you're refreshing code on your IDE, those changes are applied immediately to the web client, and that's where you can see over your live preview capabilities. This is something you can get in the other IDEs, but you'll have to install it as an additional package. And again, Brackets is also very, very lightweight and very, very intuitive as well. So also a really great tool if you are just starting out in web development. Now, last but not least, we do have Notepad++. And believe it or not, this software has been around for ages in the web development space. Unfortunately, it is only compatible with Microsoft operating systems. So if you have a Mac, this is not something that is going to work for you. And compared to the other tools, I would say Notepad++ is not nearly as intuitive as the rest of the IDEs that we just explored over here. Wonderful. Now that we have an idea of all these IDEs, let's go ahead and actually install our one that we're going to be working with, which is Atom. Hi everyone. Now the next portion of this lesson focuses on installing Atom. However, we do have to use an alternative approach to installing Atom. So before you proceed with the rest of this lesson, be sure to check this tutorial out. Now, unfortunately for us, Atom has been sunset, and in the software development world, what this means is that the software has been deprecated. In other words, the software is being archived. So this does affect some of the development work that will be carried out. However, as developers, we can always find a workaround. Now, this article basically describes why exactly it is that Atom will no longer be supported. And in a nutshell, Microsoft has officially bought GitHub, and because of this, they've now moved their support over to Visual Studio and therefore will no longer be supporting Atom. So you can have a read through the article. It's quite brief, but we're not going to go through the article. Instead, we'll dive right into the alternative method of installing Atom. So the first thing you want to do is download Atom from TechSpot. You can find it at this URL. This will be included in your summary notes as well as all other URLs. So you'll find this at TechSpot, which basically hosts an alternative download link for Atom, the latest version at least. And what you want to do is download Atom for your respective system. Next, you also want to go ahead and download Git. Now, Git is a way of cloning a repository of some code or some plugin or some package from the internet directly into our environment. This is going to be important, especially when we install the Beautify and the live server package. You want to download Git for your respective operating system. Then lastly, you also want to download Node.js. Node.js includes a package manager, which will allow us to install the Git that we've cloned into our Atom environment. And these are the two plugins or packages we will be installing. We'll navigate back to this once we've got our Atom environment set up. Excellent. So let's go ahead and start with the installation process. Now do take note that I've already downloaded Atom, Git, as well as Node.js. So I'm going to jump right into the install process, and I've also installed the software, but I'm going to walk you through the steps to successfully install the required software. So once you've downloaded the required software, in my case, I've got all of this stored in a folder called Atom Downloads on my desktop. The first software you want to install is Atom. This will automatically install. You'll have some sort of banner that comes up and it will let you know that Atom is busy installing. Again, I have installed Atom before, so I'm going to cancel this installation, and this is what the install looks like. So I'll just head over here, close this window, because once again, I already have Atom installed. Next, you want to install Node.js or the Git software. So I'll start off with Git by double clicking on the Git software, and I'll click yes for install. This will then prompt me. Again, I do have this installed, so I'm going to uncheck this so that you can see what it looks like from a fresh install perspective. I'll click next, and you can simply just click next on every prompt that you're going to get here up until the install button, which appears in place of the next button. This isn't all that important. We just really want access to Git so that we can clone the necessary packages for Atom. So next all the way through until I hit install. Once you've reached this prompt, simply install. Again, I'll cancel this. And the final piece of software is Node.js. So here, once again, you just want to go next, agree to the terms, next, select the file or folder to which you want to install Node.js, and then go next, next again. You can keep this unchecked. We don't need chocolatey for this install. Go next again and simply click install. Great. So once all of that's installed, we can start setting up Atom to make sure that everything works perfectly so that you can continue with this course without any sort of technical disruptions. Now with Atom successfully installed, let's have a look at what the UI looks like. So you might receive a couple of welcome messages. You'll also receive the sunset message, which will direct you to the blog that we just visited. The issue is, if I try to install a package in Atom, let's click on File, for example. And if I go Settings, Install, Packages, look at what happens when I try to install a package. So I'll do Atom, just Atom for the time being. If we have a look at the output, you'll notice you have this error that says certificate has expired. And again, this is just because GitHub no longer supports the development process of Atom. However, these packages are still available. They are open source, so we can easily access them. To do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close down the settings window for the time being. I'm going to navigate you through the process of cloning the packages from GitHub using your command line and the package manager, which was installed with Node.js, to install all of these packages. Now, the first step is to locate the Atom packages folder. In my case, I have it installed under C drive, users, I'll select the main user, and .atom, and then packages. So you'll notice this is empty aside from a README file. That's perfectly fine. What we'll do next is we'll simply grab the packages from GitHub and install them using the command line interface. To find your command line interface, simply head over to the Windows Start button, type in CMD, and click on the command prompt. Now this is going to bring up the command prompt as desired. And now I'll simply point this command line to this folder over here. To do that, I can simply just grab all of this over here, the specific path, copy this over, and over here, I'll use the CD command, which is going to allow me to point my command line interface to this folder over here. And then I'll simply paste that in over here, or you could type it out. It's entirely up to you. I'll click enter, and now you'll see that my command line is pointing to this specific folder, the packages folder. Now, the next step is to clone the GitHub repository. So I'll head back over to my browser, and these are the links to the respective packages that we are going to be using. So we've got Beautify by Glavin001, and we've got Atom Live Server by Chen. Again, note that these links will be provided to you in your summary notes. So let's start off with Atom Live Server. I'll grab the entire URL over here, copy it, head back over to my command line. I'll run the command git clone, which is provided to us by the Git software we installed, and I'll simply paste that URL. I'll then click enter, and we'll do a bit of work. It will clone, and once this process has been completed, we'll then point our command line. So we'll do cd, we'll point our command to this folder over here. And to do that, we can simply just do cd again, and I'll say atom -live -server. I'll click enter, and now we are within that folder. And the next step is extremely easy. I'll simply do npm install. And npm is the package manager that came along with the Node.js software. So if we enter over here, it's going to do a bit of work. You'll actually notice that the software says that it's been, or that Node.js says that the software has been deprecated, which again means it's no longer supported by GitHub or supported by the GitHub developers, but we can still use it. And that's it. That's it for installing our Atom Live Server package. So if we head back over to our Atom environment under packages, you'll notice it will still not appear. This is because we have to restart Atom. So I'll close this off. And now if I open Atom again and we navigate to packages, we can see Live Server has been installed. If we wanted to see a bit more detail, we can head to File, Settings, Packages, and you'll see Live Server has been installed. Now we can do the exact same thing for Atom Beautify. Let's close this off. And in my command over here, I'm going to cd again, and I'm going to cd to that specific URL, the packages URL. I'll come up a level. Actually, let's head back in there. I'll grab the URL once again. I'll cd into this. And the next thing we want to do is we want to clone the GitHub repository again. So I'm going to head over to this URL. I'll grab Beautify, and I'll do a git clone, paste that URL, run this, give it a bit of time to clone the package. Once that's done, we can now install the package. So I'm going to cd to Atom, I believe it's atom-beautify. Let's double check. Yes, it is. So let's actually just grab the name. So I'll cd into Atom Beautify, and then I'll do npm install. And this will install Beautify for me. Once this is done, we'll head back over to Atom to make sure that all our packages are installed. And once the process has been concluded, everything should be good to go. So you might receive a couple of warnings. You can ignore it for the time being. As long as we have access to Beautify, the software should work just fine. Excellent. Now with Beautify installed, we can head over to Atom and make sure that the software has been installed. To do this, I'll open up Atom once again. And you can see Beautify has successfully been installed. We can also validate this by heading to File, Settings, Packages, and there you go. We now have access to both Atom Beautify and Atom Live Server. Now going forward, if you ever need to install any other packages, simply locate the GitHub install or the GitHub repository and follow the same process. Once you've gone through this updated process of installing Atom, you should be well equipped to complete the rest of this course. Now, it is worth noting that in summary, the goal behind this tutorial was to show you the updated way of installing Atom, given that the old way of installing Atom no longer works. So as long as you have Atom installed, you should be able to benefit fully from this course. In the event that you want to skip over the package installations with GitHub and Node.js and the command line, you're more than welcome to do that. In fact, those packages are not really required. If anything, they are just nice to have. So with that said, let's get back to the remainder of this lesson. Now, before we get our hands dirty with any code, let's have a look at what's coming up in our next lesson. And in our next lesson, we review the important and common HTML elements used in web development. We'll also focus on text level elements, grouping elements, and providing our website with a more coherent structure as well as flow by implementing very basic navigation. We'll also explore the importance of making comments in our code. So the next session is going to be quite exciting. Okay, given that we've covered that important bit of housekeeping, it's time to get our hands dirty and it's time to start scripting without wasting any more time. So without further ado, let's code. Now, in order to start scripting and writing my first HTML document, what I need to do is I need to save this untitled file over here as an HTML file. And moving forward, this is going to be extremely important. So I'll just head over to File. I will then say Save As. And then maybe I want to just locate something on my desktop. So if I head over here and I just punch in desktop, should navigate me to my desktop, and I'm going to create a new folder over here, and I'm going to call this folder create folder, new folder. I'm going to call this folder Shore Sandbox, so that moving forward we will be using this folder as our workplace, if you will. Okay, so let me just see, where is this option? There we go. So new folder, and I'm going to say Shore Sandbox. Okay, great stuff. And then inside of this folder, I will create another folder just to separate out lessons nicely. Okay, so I'll say this is lesson 2. Okay, maybe we should actually add HTML to it, or not, we can actually keep it as is. So I'll just say L2, and then in here I'm going to save this as an HTML document. So I'm going to call this file index.html. Now, very important, we must always add the extension at the end. We need to append this at the end of any HTML document that we are creating, so that the client knows and so that the actor knows we are working with an HTML document. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click save, and I can start writing my code. And if you start typing, the nice thing about Atom is you have autocomplete features. So I'll just type in HTML, hit enter, and there you go. Voila, my entire document has just been generated for me, or a boilerplate has been generated for me. Now let's have a look at what's going on here. So if you remember in our slides earlier on, what we said is that this line over here declares the document type. Okay, so it says to the client as well as to Atom that this is an HTML document. We also have the opening tag for the HTML over here with a bit of extra attributes like lang and direct, but we don't have to worry about this for now. We won't necessarily be using this. Okay, and then we have a head opening tag over here, and then our closing tag for the head is here. Then we've got metadata inside of it. Now remember, we said that in our head tag, that's where we would sort of add information that's not necessarily inside the content of the website. And let me go ahead and show you an example over here. So in this title tag, I'm going to type in hello world. I'm going to save this, Control S on a Windows machine, or you can just hit over here and say save as, or save all. Okay, so I'm going to run this .index image file, this one particular file that we just generated now. I'm going to run it and I'm going to show you what actually happens. Now, in order to do this, what I need to do is just minimize this window and locate that folder that I created, which was on my desktop, Shore Sandbox. And let me just bring the screen over. And I'm opening this up, and if I right click on this, or you can even just click on it as normal, and we'll open up in Chrome, because Chrome is my default browser. Now I want you to take note at the top over here, this tab says hello world. Now that is why we use the head tag in HTML documents, because we want to add metadata or data or functions and things that's going on behind the scene. You'll notice this is not part of the immediate content over here. We have nothing here. So I want to say congratulations, but not just yet, because we have a couple more lines of code that we need to actually write out. So I'm going to get back into Atom. And now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a header tag. And remember, a header tag is used as a means to convey a important section of the website, if you will. So in the example that we made earlier with the blog, you would have the title of the blog. So I'm going to say header. Okay, autocomplete if you want. And then click on that. And then inside of here, we've got our opening tag for that header, and we've got our closing tag for that header. Inside of this, I'm going to specify an h1 tag, h1, hit enter, autocomplete, and I'm going to say hello world again. Okay, and the reason I'm just saying hello world again is because the name of this page is hello world according to the title. So therefore, it just makes sense that the heading sort of speaks nicely to the title. Okay, I'll save that, minimize this, and I'll refresh my page, and there you go. You have officially written your first HTML line of code and created your first web page. Now this is extremely basic, obviously, but we need to start at some point, right? So let's maybe just add one more thing to our very basic website. And what I'm going to add now is a paragraph tag. Okay, just type in P, hit enter, it will automatically generate, and I'm going to say my name is Rushan, and this is my first HTML script. Yay! Just in the event that you need to give yourself a round of applause, and I think you should, because we are making headway. So I'll save that again, Control and S on a Windows machine again, and then I'll refresh this, and there you go. You now have your very first basic web page. And yes, this is bland, but as we move forward with more complex topics, especially when we get into CSS, we are going to make things a lot more user-friendly and more appealing to the user's eyes. Okay, and then one thing I want to show you is the semantics that I was referring to when we talk about HTML. Okay, so I'm going to cut this out over here, this paragraph tag, and I'm going to paste it above my h1 tag. Even though it's in the header, that's absolutely fine. I can even take this out and put it below the header, inside the body. That's what we actually should be doing. Under normal circumstances, we want to keep everything clean, so I would actually put this in the body tag over here. Okay, so just indent that, save that. The result would essentially be the same. There won't be any changes. Okay, but just for design perspective, it makes more sense to use paragraph tags within your body. Again, I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to paste this on top of the h1 tag. Okay, and what you'll notice now is that if I refresh, the h1 tag is above the hello world header tag that we created. And why is this? Well, again, semantics, very important when it comes to HTML, and semantics refers to the fact that the code is interpreted from the top to the bottom. Okay, that is why these things have now been switched around. I'm just going to go ahead and cut this out again, put it back in here, and there you go. Wonderful stuff. So I hope the session was really useful. There's a lot more you can learn in HTML, and these are concepts we are going to be covering as we move forward, especially when it comes to attributes. So I'll see you in the next practical. Now, if you are completely new to web development, this session might have been a little taxing, but rest assured things will make sense as we progress. I do also want to remind you that you have a lesson assignment due for this particular lesson, and wishing you all the best for that.